the Trillion Trees podcast hosted by Saad Al-Lawala. Join the movement. 1 trillion trees by 2030. Tune in for inspiring stories, groundbreaking ideas, and real solutions to tackle climate change. Listen to it. Watch every Saturday, 4 p.m. Make an impact now.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Trillion Trees podcast. I'm Nafay, co-founder and chief operating officer at Trillion Trees, where we work at the intersection of climate projects, carbon markets, and scaling nature-based solutions globally. Today's conversation is slightly more technical and honestly a lot more important than people will realize. We're talking about sustainable infrastructure. I'm joined by Nazwa, who brings a really interesting perspective, having worked across engineering, infrastructure, and sustainability. Nazwa, great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Nafay, for the great introduction. So just to give a little bit about my background, I'm a sustainability consultant, and I'm very passionate about helping organizations that align their business growth with environmental sustainability and responsibility. So in a nutshell, I would say that my work actually focuses on turning climate challenges into strategic opportunities that drive innovation, climate resilience, and long-term values. So I'm deeply committed to sustainability, climate action, in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals, with the belief that leadership today must balance the profitability for the future with a purpose. I enjoy also the belief that leadership today must also balance profitability with a purpose, as in the cases of SMEs like small, medium enterprises and also large corporations. I would also say that I enjoy a lot translating complex environmental issues into practical strategies that leaders can implement with confidence. And ultimately, I'm driven by the opportunity to create meaningful impact and help build a more sustainable future for the next generations. So that's me in a nutshell.
Definitely, that was a great introduction. I am so excited for this conversation. I think there's a lot to unpack, and especially around things that are actually working on the ground. So I would like to start, go back a little in time, and let's start with your journey, because you moved from an engineering background into sustainability, which is something that isn't always linear. So what initially drew you into this space about sustainability and climate change?
Yeah, that's a really great question and a very interesting one. Because honestly, the story starts even before my career. Growing up as a kid, I kept asking myself a question over and over again. I asked this question even to my mother a few times as growing up. I remember as a teenager that what are we actually here to do in the earth? Like, what is our purpose? Is life all about just getting an education and, graduating from school, finding a job, and then, getting married, and then raising a family, and then you get old, you retire, and you die. So, all those thoughts kept running through my mind all the time. And then the next generation keeps on doing the same thing. And is that the whole story? Like, it would always keep on running in my mind. So I was like, life definitely has to be more than that. There is something far greater beyond that. And I was always firm in my conviction. So that thought always stayed with me, to be very honest. Even though I do have a bachelor's in electronic engineering from back home, that concept of Khalifa in Islam, we say that we have to be, we are actually sent in this world as Khalifas. We follow the idea of stewardship, right? So that idea is where basically the seed of sustainability started growing inside of me. The idea that we are caretakers of what we inherit and that we are not owners of anything in this planet, actually, that we hold this planet in trust. So that belief is basically what stayed with me long before I had my professional language for sustainability. So when the time came, after I finished my undergrad, I did an MBA also on human resource management, just out of a hobby, I would say, and a passion. I decided to pursue the Masters of Sustainable Design Engineering in Canada from McMaster, which is a very top-notch school here, not easy to get admission in, but not because it was the safest path, but because it was the most honest expression of that conviction that stayed with me. So, and that was the only way actually I could find in a formal academic discipline to make my passion come into reality. So, then reality set in as a fresh international graduate here in Canada. I ran into the experience paradox, however, that you need experience to get the role, but you can get the experience without the role. So right after graduation, I could not actually find anything to do related to my sustainability career in Ontario because I was undergoing my permanent residency process. And I did find a job in another province. It's in Alberta, but I couldn't move because my residency was getting processed from Toronto. So what I did is I joined a college in Toronto for 5 years. I spent there, starting as a junior advisor. Then I became a senior academic administrator. I became a campus manager. Then I moved into IT after 5 years of working there. I worked in IT in both US and Canada for 2 years. But then again, I led into organizational sustainability in a business process optimization environment. So at first glance, those experiences look like different chapters, but to me, they were all basically trainings because each one taught me how system design actually work and why good intentions often fail in execution. And after I transitioned from my last full-time job into sustainability consulting, I figured that I actually brought in a lot of transferable skills that the last 10 to 12 years of work experience here in Canada were really very essential. So yeah, now I'm practicing in my field with full passion, and I'm very proud and happy of what I'm bringing into the environment, to the corporations, and specifically to the environment. And obviously, as we said, that you serve God by serving nature and the creation. So I'm very happy in serving through my work here now.
Yeah, definitely. That was a very beautiful answer, I believe. And when you talked about, systems and system thinking and execution, one thing that, I've also noticed, especially with people with engineering backgrounds, is that they tend to approach sustainability very differently. It's more or less about theory, it's more about execution and system thinking, like you said, that you brought in a lot of transferable skills into this profession. So how
Mhm.
how has that, shaped how you approach the problems today?
Yeah. So I think I entered sustainability because it was not a trending profession at that time when I just graduated. I felt there was a necessity in this field that was growing out of the climate change and the global warming crisis that we were watching, pan over time. And in the last, I think, 10, 15 years, things really got really bad. So I would say my master's degree gave me the systems thinking, while my operational experiences for the last 10 to 12 years gave me a reality check of what's happening on the ground. So I think the organizational experience that I gathered, it filled me with capable, well-intentioned, and I also work with a lot of fantastic colleagues who are also highly efficient, who genuinely wanted to improve the work and their work environment, but also contributing to the nature and also to the environment. But they struggled a lot to translate that into meaningful decisions, into meaningful incentives. And sometimes we also saw from like CSR perspective, corporate social responsibility perspective, that sometimes there is lack of incentives, there's lack of budgets, procurement, or sometimes there isn't really a corporate culture. Not necessarily in a North American context, but because now I'm working also in the global South, I see a lot of this problem still lingering. So that basically reshaped me how I understand the challenge. And I thought I can bring in my systems design ideas and my operational experience to basically implement all of those changes in sustainability. Because most sustainability issues, they are not rooted in a lack of values. I would say they are rooted in execution. So since then, I have approached sustainability as a system design and delivery change, where meaningful progress depends on turning ambition into action.
Definitely. Now moving towards more of our topic of discussion. Sustainable infrastructure is one of those terms that is, getting used around a lot lately, but rarely explained properly what exactly that is. So from your perspective and professional experience, what does it actually look like in practice?
Yeah, it's a very trending word. It's a viral word right now, like for the last 5 years, I would say. But for me, it's a very straightforward concept. Infrastructure that reliably serves people over time without degrading the environmental, the financial, or social system it depends on is basically what sustainable infrastructure is. That is the core idea behind it. And I think the last part matters a lot, which is the social part because we often celebrate what gets built and we often ignore what gets depleted. So let's say if a project creates power, but it destroys a watershed, that's not really sustainable. That's clearly, I would say, a delayed cost. So I would also go one step further because there is another word that is also very trending and viral these days. It's net zero, right? Net zero is important, but it's the floor, it's not the ceiling. So that means it tells you how much damage you are allowed to do. But the next frontier is also nature positive infrastructure because I think for global south perspectives, from a cost effective point, actively restoring and working with natural systems is extremely important because it's easy to do. It has been there for decades and centuries. And sustainable infrastructure in terms of green infrastructure, nature-based solutions are easily implementable. For example, I would say, let's say in Bangladesh, where I'm originally from, mangroves actually protect the coastlines. And we have some of the biggest mangrove forests in the world in the Sundarbans, which is in Bangladesh, on the south coastal region. And they're easy to maintain actually. And they can act as buffers for tsunamis and cyclones. They reduce floods. The urban forest, they can lower the heat stress. There's a technical term for it. It's called heat island effect. I'm not going to go there. So basically reduces the temperature of the environment as we plant more trees. So a lot of the answers to climate adaptation are already there in nature, and they have always been there. They're cheaper, as I mentioned. They're more resilient and long-lasting than engineered alternatives. We just have to be willing to look into them because nature isn't separate from sustainable infrastructure at all. Especially green infrastructure is actually a very critical, important, and a vital infrastructure by itself.
Definitely. At trajectories, we see something similar in, nature-based projects, that the solution are often already known, but scaling and execution is where things break, right? So do you think infrastructure has the same issues? Less of what to do problem, more of like how to implement at scale problem, I guess.
Um, so I would say that it is all about intentions, to be very practical and to be very pragmatic with you. There will be trade-offs, yes, but I think we always have to think about the long-term value, right? If there is any gap, like what is the gap actually? Are we taking into considerations the human cost, the human health cost? Are we considering the environmental cost? If you're only focusing on the short-term gain, but you are overlooking the long-term cost, then I think that is where we actually have to think deeply so that we are not creating any gap. And I personally feel that, solutions like solar, it's actually becoming one of the cheapest form of energy infrastructure in the world. And there will come a time when coal will actually become pretty expensive. So you see in countries like China, even in India, they're actually gearing up their energy infrastructure in terms of building more solar because sun is available in that part of the world a lot compared to where I am in Canada, right? So we have to take into account the geographical advantage that each of these countries have. And I think then we can build infrastructure around that, and then the gap will be mitigated and there will be less trade-off. We will be taking care of the environment, we will be taking care of the planet, and then people's health as well, which is a huge cost and a burden to the society if human health costs are not taken into consideration. And yeah, I think overall the long-term benefit will obviously always offset the short-term consequences.
Definitely. So my next question is like, to what extent do you think is the challenge today about innovation versus better implementation of these existing, solutions?
I think if you talk about challenges, I would say governance is a big challenge in today's world, because technically and financially, I would say we are technologically pretty advanced, and a lot of countries, like Scandinavian countries, even North America, we are doing a lot of technological advancement. We are doing a lot of R&D research in renewable energy, and the government is also releasing financial, packages, and they're developing new instruments as well, climate funds and all. But yes, governance is still a real constraint, I would say. As someone trained in engineering, I have seen that the institutional architecture to connect both effectively, like the technical and financial and governance, has always been a challenge. For example, clear land rights, and then transparent procurement, enforceable contracts, independent regulators, and accountable decision making. They all have to come together hand in hand. So many infrastructure challenges sometimes appear technical, but in practice, they are basically governance failures, shaped by incentives, trust deficits, and weak coordination. So I'd say from a behavioral and systems design perspective, the outcomes improve when institutions reduce friction. We can better align our stakeholder incentives, and then we can create predictable rules and reinforce those responsible behavior over time. So finance and technology can sometimes route around poor governance, but yes, that usually creates fragility rather than durable resilience. So I think governance is something which we all have to focus on, and the government, obviously for each different country, each of its own, has to be more responsible in this kind of initiatives.
Definitely. So now we move towards more of like a developed infrastructure. So like where do you think most cities or like infrastructure systems are falling short today?
That is a very technical question, but I'll try to answer it in a layman's term. I think in terms of infrastructure, I think we have something called technology transfer. So, and then there is lack of capacity building as well. So the developed countries, actually, they have a responsibility to do knowledge sharing with developing nations like LDCs and seeds nations. So I think even though technology transfer is sometimes occurring, but I don't see there is an enough emphasis on learning or registering from a particular project what we learned. And instead of working on the learned register, working on it, like what went wrong in the project, what worked in the project, what we can learn out from it. So kind of like a capacity building. I think this is where a lot of our developing countries are still falling behind, even though things are improving a lot over time. But I think the training part, the capacity building part is falling short a lot. And that is where we actually need to gear up and pull up our socks. There needs to be, I think, bottom-up approach where the communities should be given a little bit more leadership and more, how to say, in non-technical terms, more authority, so that they can create a sense of ownership within the community, and they can basically share what they learn from, let's say, a sustainable infrastructure project, even within their residents. So then each resident would know what to do when certain disaster strikes that community, and not just keep that knowledge, or not just keep that idea or that technical innovation within just the hub, within the innovation hub. So I think the knowledge transfer needs to be more dispersed, which is a gap. It's a big gap, I would say. And I think the technical knowledge needs to be transferred in a more, how to say, highly capacitated manner, like more training capacity needs to be built up so that whenever there is a situation like disaster risk recovery, we have like personals in different levels, and they know exactly what to do when a climate disaster strikes. And then we don't have to scramble hard. And because any kind of natural disaster like floods, right, cyclones, actually like billion-dollar disasters. So the more knowledge transfer in a more mitigated manner, I think the better it will be for our community and the local residents.
When you talk about, those developing and um, emerging markets, it's more visible in that manner. And often feels like there's no shortage of like ambitions, targets, commitments, or frameworks. But when it comes to like actual delivery, things, often get slowed down. So it's more on the execution part where the gap is clearly seen, especially in the global south. So
Mhm.
in your experience, where does that disconnect comes from? You talked about capacity building and you talked about technology transfer, but
Mhm.
where do you feel like the gap in execution really comes from?
I think from a technological perspective, we already have more solution than we are deploying.
Mm-hmm.
Technologically, we are not lagging behind at all. That is the most honest answer. For example, solar efficient buildings, grid upgrades, translate, water reuse, and nature-based solutions. They are not future concepts waiting to be invented. They are proven solutions waiting to be implemented at scale, right? But we still need long-term innovation in areas like battery storage, green hydrogen, industrial heat, I would say sustainable aviation. And I want to personally see more sustainable transportation being implemented, especially in high population zones. For countries like India, Bangladesh, we are one of the most densely populated countries in the world, and air pollution is really, really bad, and it's getting worse. So, and those gaps are actually real. So, but today's larger bottleneck is not science, I would say, it's the system design and the implementation of those systems. So, if we deployed what already works, we could, I think, close a significant share of that gap. The real constraint, therefore, is institutions, incentives, and execution. It's definitely not technology.
Definitely, I feel the same as well. So, um, my next question was, branching off of that, but we have clearly identified that, technology is not one of those things that is lacking and the biggest constraint. It's more financial or governance, basically. So
Mhm.
is the issue more about, policy design when we talk about actual implementation and enforcement? Because there have been private sector like execution, which has moved faster towards this. So how would you comment on that?
So, if I understand well, your question is if there is any disconnect between policy and then on the ground execution of
Yeah.
projects, right? So I would say yes, there is a gap, and it usually breaks down in one of two places, at the interface between national policy and subnational delivery, or at the transition from planning to procurement. What does that mean? So you can have an excellent national green infrastructure strategy that never produces a single shovel on the ground because municipalities, they sometimes actually do lack the capacity, as I was just mentioning, to prepare bankable projects, or because procurement rules, they weren't really designed for the complexity of sustainable infrastructure contracts. I would say the other failure mode is policy instability. Infrastructure requires long-term capital commitments, and when the regulatory framework sometimes it shifts with every election cycle, we see new leaders coming in. They're stopping the previous projects, or maybe they're stopping the doing some unconventional changes within the projects. Then obviously the investors don't feel comfortable, right? They don't feel confident. So their pricing there will be a difference in their trust level as well. And that's where uncertainty falls in. So the capital either gets more expensive or it doesn't just come through at all. So this is where we fail. Like ambition without any institutional continuity is just an aspiration, because ultimately, we need to have stricter rules on the ground that no matter what, how the governance cycles are changing, certain good projects, if the funds has been released and if the investor is happy with the project, so we should just proceed with it regardless of who's coming in power next. So this is something I have seen a lot, especially in Global South projects. I think it's a behavioral design approach and a perspective that must go hand in hand to have better outcomes.
Definitely. It's interesting across, climate, whether it's infrastructure or carbon markets, the bottleneck often seems less about innovation and more about, the alignment across stakeholders.
Mhm.
So When you actually try to scale the sustainable system, right, what are the challenges that don't get talked about enough?
Scaling. I think operations and maintenance is something I have seen a lot. O&M, as we said. I think is the most underestimated challenge in sustainable infrastructure by a significant margin. There is enormous attention on building the assets, but there is far less idea or attention on keeping them performing well over time.
Yeah.
So sustainable infrastructure is often more technically complex than conventional systems, which means our operations and maintenance requirements are typically higher, not lower. When those capabilities are not developed locally, then you would see that the assets are degrading faster over time. The communities are losing their trust and hope and confidence. And obviously, down the line, eventually, it actually causes the investors also to become reluctant to return back with more investment. So I think, again, capacity building is part of operations and maintenance. And the second overlooked challenge is data, which is not talked about at all. I also talked about the learned register before. So scaling of that data depends on replication, and replication depends on understanding what actually worked, what did not work, what failed, and why it failed. So if we can actually manage a learned register around that, the infrastructure sector would remain strong at capturing all of this information. And I think sharing those data and the performance of those data is very important on similar projects. It would improve the future projects. It would often lead to less costly reinvestment, and continuous learning will also grow that you can share with other communities. So yeah, I think O&M is actually one of the under-discussed challenge when scaling sustainable systems.
Definitely. We've seen that long-term impact, often clashes with short-term incentives towards the systematic thinking, especially when capital expects quicker returns. So let's look forward into this. So what kind of opportunities excite you most over the 5 to 10 years that are coming into this?
That is also a very interesting, and it's a very big question actually, because within the next 5 to 10 years, so many changes are actually going to happen with AI coming into place, right? First, I would say the convergence of digital and physical infrastructure, sensors, predictive maintenance, smart grids, real-time water quality monitoring, all can be done utilizing or taking help of artificial intelligence. The ability to adapt systems in real time is going to change what resilience actually looks like in practice. This is the first thing I would say. Secondly, local capital markets, financing local infrastructure. Pension funds and emerging market is becoming infrastructure investors in their own countries. So that's a structural shift with massive long-term implications. The third thing I would say is nature-based solutions. Again, it's actually one of my favorite topics, and it's actually gaining more and more tractions across the globe, not just in the global south, but also here in the European countries, but as well as in the North American nations. If it's being treated seriously by institution, I think we can achieve a lot of our targets in mitigating carbon dioxide and other harmful gases. I don't want to go into the technical details of nature-based solutions. These are actually not just nice to have. A nature-based solution doesn't necessarily just mean planting trees. Nature-based solution has a lot of technical projects that we can do, from bioretention to wetlands, swamps, conservation of species which are getting extinct. They are our stormwater management system, and there are xeriscaping, there are biomimicry, so a lot of stuff are there for nature-based solutions. So people are realizing that, and NBS is actually becoming more and more cheaper. It's obviously one of the most climate resilient infrastructure. It's faster to deploy. Obviously, it's very aesthetic, and it's good for mental and physical well-being of ourselves. And it's more adaptive actually than engineered alternatives. So that recognition is a genuine turning point. And I would see personally, I think we would see more nature-based solution, green infrastructure, blue infrastructure coming into play. Yeah.
Definitely, I believe so. I believe, same as well. And that's what we're doing here at Trillium Trees. It's about scaling the right kind of nature-based solutions within the corporate markets. and also working with governments in the global south where they are implementing more of this in play. Um, my next question is the same because we have seen that all of this is moving towards a convergence, right? Where
Mhm.
infrastructure, climate finance, and nature-based solutions are all overlapping. So do you see that happening as well in the global north and North America? Because it is happening in the global south now.
Mhm. Because I'm working more with Global South projects, I can say that yes, in Southeast Asia and in sub-Saharan African countries as well, it's happening a lot because I'm working with two projects right now. I think when countries cannot rely on legacy systems, they are able to find differently, and sometimes more intelligently that other infrastructure is working. And yes, here also in North America, I think some of the most promising energy projects as well as nature-based solution projects are happening here, and very big projects are taking place. And we consult with the indigenous communities. They are actually one of the primary stakeholders in North America, both in US and in Canada. We have to take consultative approaches to discuss with them, because when you work with nature-based solutions, you have to actually take into account the local mindset of the local people, not just finance. We cannot just rely on technical advancement and the financing. Um, so I would see in the long run, I think on financing models, I expect to see greater growth in local currency, sustainable infrastructure bonds, including green sukuk, which is basically a Sharia-based and interest-free model. This is taking place in the MENA regions as domestic capital market deepen, and that's a more durable structural solution, as international finance can support the transition, but it cannot replace strong local capital ecosystems, right? And I see equally here in North America a commitment from the indigenous communities, and they have a sense of ownership to the communities that they're in. We get a lot of good amount of data from them as to how to go about with the nature-based projects, because they live closest to the nature. They have more knowledge and understanding of what works and what doesn't work in terms of nature-based projects. So getting them involved and keeping them as one of the most important stakeholder, I think has really worked well for us. And for the global south, I think, yeah, bonds like climate bonds like Green Sukuk. And obviously, again, women empowerment is something that also comes into play, because in sub-Saharan desert, women play a huge role. So even getting them involved would bring in successful nature-based project, I think. So I would say inclusive leadership from all aspect is highly important.
Yeah, that was a great answer, I believe. So now moving towards the end of this conversation, we'll go forward towards the people part. For people who are coming with, engineering backgrounds and technical backgrounds, what would
Mhm.
you advise if they want to move into sustainability? Because towards this newer era, we've seen a lot of people go from, technical engineering backgrounds to AI, but there is also a move because sustainability is not just about policy and people management and systems thinking. It needs that technical background for people to actually think and create and execute eventually. So what would your advice be?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. Your technical background is definitely a sure advantage. There is no doubt about it. You definitely have to use it if you are working as a sustainable design engineer. So sustainability is a huge spectrum of knowledge, experience, people that we need. So not only do we need sustainable design engineers, we also need people on the policy side working in sustainability. So if you are having a good knowledge of technical expertise, definitely you can work as an engineer. It needs more people who can distinguish signal from marketing and who can hold a framework accountable when it doesn't add up. But I would say the technical skill alone isn't enough. The policy part is equally important. We have to definitely learn about climate financing, climate change, also a little bit of science in terms of biology and chemistry is definitely needed. We do have to understand about climate mitigation and adaptation, what those two, extremely important terminologies are, and what those projects mean and how they basically bring value to the environment. The under stressed and often not discussed soft skill is communication. So I think we have to learn a lot about stakeholder dynamics because climate problems are rarely technical in isolation. They are technical problems embedded inside human systems. So if you can operate across both the worlds with really good communication skill and you understand the pain points of your client for a project, but at the same time, you're helping them to make them stand as a global leader from a sustainability perspective, because many companies are actually, most of the large corporations are actually now expected to be sustainability leader in the industry. And if you understand that part, you become genuinely valuable as a resource, as an asset in a way that is very hard to replicate. So a few things here, like technical knowledge, policy, learning the science behind climate change in terms of mitigation and adaptation, and obviously climate communication.
Definitely. I feel like you really summed that answer really well. But a little short, what do people underestimate about this space? Because sustainability is thrown around everywhere, and like you mentioned right now, corporates that they are supposed to be these sustainability leaders and sustainable leaders. So, what is something that is people don't really understand about this space?
I think when you will, if you, as a design engineer or a sustainable design engineer, or even as a consultant, what I often come across is a lot of even C-level executives, they really don't understand what their corporate social responsibility is if it, even though it is part of under their banner, like they have one of their wings under their companies as CSR. But I have often come across people in C-level and also in the mid-level, they don't have a very clear knowledge about what they can bring in terms of sustainability leadership. So this is where I think systems thinking fail a lot, because this is the foundational capability in sustainability leadership. That is where you need to come in with the capacity building, the training. So I think it's very important to have the ability to understand how different parts of our environment, planet, and people, plus profit, they all are interconnected and how they work together. We need to understand where the feedback loops exist and how an intervention in one area can actually create unintended consequences elsewhere. For example, as first world countries in North America, we are actually importing a lot of our goods from China. But China is, again, a leader in sustainable energy projects. So a lot of their pollution is actually coming, it's a cliche, a lot of their pollution is actually coming for developing products, goods for countries which are in other part of the world, but they are having to suffer the consequences of the pollution that is coming by producing those products. So I think this is where the gap is, and we need to understand as leaders to solve the root cause rather than the symptoms. And equally important, I would say, is communication. So capacity building, understanding of what actually sustainability is. We need more marketing campaigns, I would say, on the TV, on the radio, because the crisis is exacerbating at a speed unprecedented. And there are a lot of climate naysayers, even now, who are in complete denial that there is something called climate crisis. And I think equally important is our ability to translate technical complexities into languages that inspires action from funders, policymakers, businesses, and communities. That means we have to make them understand sustainable development projects, the benefit clean energy brings, the benefit, let's say, big projects like nuclear brings. This is not a soft skill. It's a very important force multiplier. So even the strongest technical solution has limited value if stakeholders do not fully understand why it matters or how to support such projects. So I think delivering that understanding in a very free-flowing manner without using journal and technical keywords, I think is very important. And general knowledge, I think, on a vast, we can use like a broadcast media. So more awareness can be created from a civil society angle. I think that is something we are lacking a lot in majority part of the world, not just in the global south, even here in North America. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
Definitely, I believe that's what we see as well. It's a very nice way of marketing, and then public awareness is something that will really make this space flourish because there is a crisis that is going on. We see, and we've seen with Bill Gates coming up with these chemtrails and all of that, and we see that really in the global south happening right now. Um, so I believe that is how things will go around, and this needs to change. So I guess this was it. This was a really nice conversation as well, especially around how much sustainability today is important and about execution and alignment and not just ideas. I really appreciate you taking the time for this.
Thank you so much, Nafay. It was nice speaking with you. And I would love to have more conversation. This conversation can go on and on. It's a very important topic. We can have separate sessions on different technology, maybe another time. But yeah, for now, I think I've given a lot of important pieces of information that maybe the future young leaders of sustainability or who are planning to come can gain some some knowledge before they start getting their experience. And it's a booming sector. It's a very important sector. Also, it's coming with its benefits that you give back to the society, you give back to the people, to the planet. So it's a very noble profession, just like how medical doctors they work, nurses they work, teachers they work. I think this is a very noble profession as well, because you're serving the planet at the end of the day, and by serving planet and humanity, you're serving God.
Definitely. So, to everyone who is listening to this, if you're building or exploring climate and sustainability, this is a space where real work is happening beneath the surface. We will link all of Nazwa's social and her professional experience and her LinkedIn down below in the description. So do check it out, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.